So you sent over some information on a really important issue, and it's something I think we really need to un- dig into a little bit. The problem of hunger in South Africa. And just looking through everything you gave me, wow, the scope of it is really something. So for this deep dive, let's really zero in on the state of hunger in South Africa, just based on what you've given me here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to kind of break down exactly how many people are affected and then some of the economic factors that, that really drive this problem. And then get into this kind of crazy fact that South Africa actually produces enough food to feed everybody. So why are people hungry? We'll look into that, and of course, this huge issue of food waste, and then most importantly, talk about some potential solutions. How do we fix this? So our goal here is to really, pull out the most important points in this information you've given me and give you a much clearer understanding of what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, let's start with just how big of a problem is this? The number that really jumped out at me was 9.34 million. 9.34 million. That's how many South Africans experience hunger in 2023. I mean, that's just a mind-boggling number.
Yeah, it's a huge number, and I think it's so important to remember that, that's not just a number. Each one of those is a person. That's a life. That's a whole story of struggle. And as this information points out, you're talking about parents who are going hungry so their kids can eat, kids trying to learn in school on an empty stomach.
Yeah.
That has some really serious consequences for those kids and for their future.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really paints this picture of what daily life is like for so many people,
Yeah.
making these impossible choices between paying rent or putting food on the table or keeping the lights on versus buying bread. I mean, it's hard to even imagine, that kind of hardship if you haven't lived it.
It is. And then when you start to look at the economics, the financial side of it, it really adds another layer to this whole thing. I mean, the fact that the average household in South Africa is spending something like 40% of their income just on food, that tells you just how central this issue is to just basic survival for so many people.
Yeah, yeah. And this next point, this really highlights a problem with the system, I think. Even though people are spending such a huge percentage on food, there's no social grant, no like government assistance specifically for buying food. I mean, that seems like a pretty big oversight, when you're talking about something as basic as eating.
Right. Yeah. It's a major gap. And then you connect that to the way that food insecurity is changing geographically.
Right.
It used to be mainly a rural problem, but now it's shifting towards cities and Gauteng, which is the economic heart of South Africa. That's where hunger is really starting to grow.
Okay, yeah. And the numbers from Gauteng, those really paint a clear picture of that. Johannesburg, almost 25% of households there, you're talking about like 1.48 million people who don't have enough to eat. And then you have Ekurhuleni at 17.1%, and then Tshwane at 14.1%. And again, these aren't, just statistics. Those are real people in major cities who are struggling to put food on the table.
Yeah, exactly. And then when you look at how much it actually costs to feed a family, especially in a city like Johannesburg, that's when it really hits home. Like the average cost of just a basic food basket in February 2025, it was over R$5,400. And that's already higher than the average across the whole country.
Wow. And when you consider that the median salary back in 2022 is around R$5,400, I mean, that just doesn't add up for a lot of people in Gauteng. They're making, that's their entire monthly income, and it's not even enough to cover the cost of food. That's more than a challenge. That's a crisis.
Exactly. Yeah. Which brings us to this really strange paradox. South Africa actually produces enough food to feed everyone in the country.
Right.
So all this hunger that we're seeing is not because there isn't enough food being grown. The country has the agricultural capacity.
That's really interesting. So if it's not a production problem, if they're growing enough food, then where's the system breaking down? What's preventing people from getting that food?
Well, this information lays out some pretty clear problems.
Okay.
Yeah, problems with distribution, getting that food to the people who need it. Affordability, can people afford to buy it even if it's available? Availability, is it, actually in the stores in all areas? And then accessibility, can people, physically get to the food? So the food exists, it's just not getting to the people who need it in a reliable or affordable way.
Okay, yeah. And that's where this other really shocking statistic comes in. 10 million tons of food wasted every year. 10 million. That's almost impossible to comprehend, especially when you think about how many people are going hungry.
10 million tons. That's a lot of food. And the crazy thing is, if we could just, if we could just use that food, it could feed all the hungry people in South Africa several times over.
Yeah.
You know, that just shows how inefficient and frankly, how ethically questionable our current food systems really are.
Yeah. And and it's important to point out that this isn't just about food spoiling, in people's homes. A lot of this waste, according to what we have here, is happening within the food industry itself, during production, processing, distribution in the stores. And it seems like a lot of that is because of practices that are focused on making money rather than making sure everyone has enough to eat.
Exactly. So you're talking about systemic problems, problems that are built into the way the whole food system works. And all of that waste, it goes against this basic human right to have enough food.
Yeah. And that's really what this boils down to. It's a human rights issue, and this information, it's very clear on this point. Access to food and water, that's a basic right in South Africa. It's in their constitution. It's not a luxury. It's a necessity, and it's a right.
Exactly. So when millions of people are being denied that right consistently, well, that means that there are serious problems in the system, problems that we need to address urgently.
Hmm.
And it means going beyond just general poverty alleviation and really focusing on those breakdowns in the system. How do we make food available and affordable for everybody?
So, okay, we've got this huge number of people who are hungry. We've got these economic pressures. We've got this insane amount of food waste, and yet the country can feed itself. So what are the solutions? I mean, where do you even begin to tackle a problem of this magnitude?
Well, addressing that food waste, that seems like a really good place to start. Something that could have a big impact right away. And we're really interested in what's happening in places like France and Italy. They've passed laws that require supermarkets and stores to donate food that they would otherwise just throw away. What do you think about that?
I mean, it just seems so practical. It's common sense. You have perfectly good food that's just going to end up in the trash. Why not give it to people who are hungry? I mean, that just makes sense. It's a simple solution that could really make a difference.
Right. And it shows how powerful legislation, laws can be in actually changing how we treat food and how we value it. But as this information also points out, laws are only part of the answer.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it talks about the importance of, doing things at a local level too, like community gardens, urban agriculture. Things like that can really help people get access to fresh, affordable food, especially in cities where, like we were talking about, food insecurity is growing.
Absolutely. And we also need to support all those organizations that are already out there, doing the work day after day. They're providing food to people in need, and they've got this really valuable local knowledge and the infrastructure to reach those people who need it most.
So it sounds like we need, like a multi-pronged approach, not just quick fixes, but real systemic changes, changing the way we produce food, distribute food, even the way we think about food and consume food.
Exactly. And the information really drives home this point that we need to change our whole perspective on hunger. It's definitely connected to poverty, but it's also a crisis in its own right. And we need to treat it that way. We need political will. We need action. We need to rethink our food systems so that they're inclusive, so that everyone has access, and so that they're sustainable. We can't keep doing what we're doing.
It really is unacceptable, to have this much hunger in a country that can produce enough food for everyone. And it's not that we can't solve it. It's more, it seems like a question of priorities. Are we willing to really commit to solving this problem?
That's the question. And it leads to this really powerful question that this information asks. It's kind of a challenge, really.
Yeah, it really makes you think. So we've covered a lot in this deep dive, this huge problem of hunger in South Africa, the economic pressures that are making it worse, this incredible amount of food waste, while at the same time, the country could be feeding everyone. We've talked about how food is a human right and the need for real change. And that brings us to this final question, which is really directed at you, the listener.
The question is not whether we can end hunger. It's whether you believe we are willing to act now.